We are in the Mishnah on 24a, right? Daled Amud Aleph 24a, yeah. So as we explained yesterday, this Mishnah delves into the nature of the people who qualify to be a Sotah. Right? The Sotah, of course, is the woman we've been discussing since we started this we're almost 200 classes in. And essentially, it's the woman who's been suspect by her husband for having a relationship with a particular person, and he warns her against that. So until this point, as we discussed yesterday, the Gemara took us on a very detailed journey of every single precise part of the process, from his warning to her seclusion, to her being brought to the temple, to the proceedings in the temple, and so on and so forth. And now the Gemara turns its attention to discussing what is the nature of the relationship between husband and wife that would qualify to be a Sotah, and what's the nature of the woman. And the principle, as we explained, is based on the fact that Torah says that he warns his wife, and then he warns his wife, and she misbehaves while she's still under the relationship, while she's still within the relationship of her husband, thus implying that the marriage must be legitimate in order for her to qualify as a Sotah. That's what we discussed yesterday, that there are times when either the relationship isn't complete yet, it's engagement, betrothal, she's in his intended because she lost her husband, and this is the brother-in-law who is intended to marry, so he's not her husband yet, and therefore doesn't qualify to be Sotah. Or, as we explained, there are times when a person marries someone else that they aren't supposed to, a priest to a divorcee, a high priest to a widow, but an ordinary Jew to a girl who was born from an illegitimate marriage, or born from an illegitimate relationship, or the reverse, a guy born from an illegitimate relationship who marries a girl. So even though their marriage is recognized as a legal marriage, and if they wanted to separate, they would need to go through the divorce process. But nonetheless, this is a kind of marriage that Torah looks askance on. Torah does not approve of this relationship, even though it validates it legally, but it disapproves of the relationship. And as such, she doesn't qualify, as the verse describes. She misbehaves while she is with her husband. It's technically her husband, but Torah doesn't like the fact that this is her husband, because they really shouldn't have married to begin with. And thus, if he were to warn her against being with another person, she wouldn't qualify as a Sotah. That's the first premise. The other element we discussed is, so she doesn't get the Sotah, she doesn't go through the proceeding, but what happens to their marriage now? He's suspicious of his relationship with her, so they might go through a divorce. Maybe even they should go through a divorce, because they have a mistrusting relationship, right? He's suspecting her of infidelity, and he warns her against it, and here she goes off secluded with this fellow. So maybe their relationship is falling apart, and they'll divorce. So is he now obligated to give her the Ketubah? So we learned so far is, the answer is no. He doesn't give her the Ketubah. As you explained yesterday, the Ketubah is a financial way of keeping the husband in a relationship. So he shouldn't take advantage of his wife. Marry her, spend a couple of days with her, and then throw her a bill of divorce and be gone with her. So the Ketubah is there to protect her. That if he wanted to divorce her, it would cost him a pretty penny. But in this case, where he has grounds to suspect her of infidelity, if not outright infidelity, because we don't know what happened in the behind closed doors, why would we financially bind him to the marriage? There's no reason to financially bound him to a woman who's suspect, and thus, because of her misdeed, she loses the right to her Ketubah, even though she isn't brought to the temple to do the drinking of the water in the Sotah, because the nature of her marriage is such that Torah says you shouldn't have been married. This is where we are in the Mishnah. Clear? Okay. So the Gemara now goes on to other such relationships in which, or other such scenarios in which the woman does not go through the proceeding of drinking the Sotah waters, right? That water in which there's the ink mixed and the flour and the earth, right? The ink from a parchment upon which was written the text of the Sotah. So other scenarios in which she won't go through with drinking that water, and she also loses her ketubah. And then we're going to go through scenarios in which she takes her ketubah but doesn't drink the water. Right? So let's see. Ve'elu, the following are, second line on top of Chavdal of base 24a. Ve'elu, and the following are loy shoisais, they don't go through with the proceeding of the Sotah and they don't drink the water. And likewise, loy noitlois ksuba, they do not take, they lose the right to their ketubah in the case of divorce. So these are the following cases. Essentially, it all comes down to, let's see. Number one, haimeres tinmeani. Right, so remember from way back when, the first thing that happens when the woman is brought to the temple is the kohen gives her a speech and telling her that you should know drinking the water is a very serious business. And if you want to confess to the fact that you were unfaithful, now would be the time to do so, rather than go through with the proceeding and drink the water and having God's name in the race, and then you're drinking it, and then God forbid the demise that that water brings with it. So during this whole speech, let's say, or for whatever reason, she decides to come clean and says, I was unfaithful. When I was caught behind closed doors with this fellow, we indeed engaged in a relationship that we shouldn't have. So this woman then, she doesn't drink the Sotah water. There's no reason to drink it anymore. The whole reason to drink the Sotah water was to determine whether or not she was faithful or not. Right? If she drinks the water and she survives, we know that she behaved. If she drinks the water and dies, we know she misbehaved. But now she already came clean. She told us she's unfaithful. So why would we make her drink the water? And of course, because she was unfaithful, she no longer has the right to claim for a ketubah. Right? That's scenario number one. Number two, shabo la edim shitmeya. If witnesses came along and said, we saw what happened behind closed doors, and we know she was unfaithful. So ordinarily, the law of the Sotah is that we know she was behind closed doors because we have witness to that effect. But we don't know what happened behind closed doors. And therefore, we drink the Sotah water. We make her drink the Sotah water to determine what happened behind closed doors. If she survives, she behaved. If she doesn't survive, she misbehaved. But now we have witnesses that tell us that we saw what happened. We were at a distance and we saw through the window that she misbehaved, whatever it is that they saw. So now we no longer need the Sotah water because we already know that she's guilty. Right? And she'll be tried in court for her guilt, whatever the consequences are there. And certainly she loses her right to the ketubah because she was unfaithful. That's scenario number two. Number three, vaimeres eini shoisa. A woman who says, I'm not admitting to guilt, but I don't want to drink this water. I don't want to do it. I don't want to have God's name erased because of me. I don't want to have it on my conscience. Yeah. I'm not doing it. So she's not acknowledging any guilt, but doesn't want to drink the water. So we're not going to force her to, but because she's not going through with it, she forfeits her right to the ketubah. Because even if she was faithful behind closed doors, she's certainly someone who's suspect. Because against her husband's express wishes, she secluded herself with this fellow. Right? So she loses her ketubah, right? Because she doesn't want to go through the process of verifying that she was either faithful or unfaithful. So she loses her ketubah, and we're not going to force her to drink, because why should we force her to drink? So these are the cases in which she doesn't drink the Sotah waters, and she loses her ketubah. Now there should be a little period here in the Gemara, in the Mishnah, and now begins a new section. The cases we're about to read now are cases in which she retains her right to the ketubah, and yet she doesn't drink the sotah water. Okay, we clear? So we began with not drinking the water and not taking the ketubah, because essentially she admitted to guilt. Either by explicitly admitting to guilt, we have witnesses to the fact that she's guilty, or she's not expressly stating she's guilty, but she doesn't want to drink the water, so she doesn't have to, and she loses her ketubah rights because of her misconduct. Now, the next cases are going to be a case where she doesn't drink the sotah water, but she retains the right to the ketubah. And essentially, it's going to come down to the husband misbehaving. Let's see. Amar Baila Eine Mashke. If the husband said, I don't want to go with this proceeding anymore, I'm done. Stop. So she's ready to drink through the water. She's so adamant about her innocence that she's willing to drink those waters and take the risk of dying, essentially, because she's adamant that she's innocent. But the husband says, I don't want it on my conscience that God's name is erased. Okay, so we're not going to make her drink, but why should she lose her ketubah? We don't know of any guilt, definitely. She's not admitting to any guilt, not even inferring it by saying, I don't want to drink. It's he that says, I'm okay taking the risk. I don't want her to drink. So if he's accepting the risk upon himself, there's no reason why she should lose her ketubah. So she retains the right to her ketubah. Case number one, yeah?
If she's saying, like, they're both saying, okay, I don't want to risk God's name, I don't want to drink this, that. Well,
it's a difference if she says it or he says it, though.
Right. No, for sure. Definitely difference. But my question is that once to make the drink, you have to erase God's name. So the drink is already made. Now that you don't want to drink it, it's already
we discussed that earlier in the Gemara. What happens? Way earlier in the Gemara. What happens if we already brought the offering? Do we continue going? If we already erased? Let's discuss different opinions about that. Let's just assume here it's before the before the drink was made. Even though the Gemara discusses whether the drink was made at this point, but we're going to put that aside for now. Let's just assume for argument's sake that the drink wasn't made yet. Okay, so that's scenario number one, in which she retains the right to her ketubah, but it doesn't have to be drink the water. Where the husband says, I don't want the risk. Don't go through with it. So because he is accepting upon himself the risk of whatever happened behind closed doors, and she in no way admitted to anything, and she's willing to go through the process of clarification by drinking the water, so she retains her right to the ketubah. Scenario number two, in which she doesn't drink the water and keeps her ketubah, is shebayla ba'ala b'derech. If her husband engaged intimately with her before they arrived at the temple, right? So we explained the process yesterday and over the Gemara of the past, that after he warns her against secluding herself with a certain man, and there are witnesses to and we have knowledge to the fact that she did seclude herself, so he brings her to the court locally in their little town in Israel, wherever they are. That court decides, okay, she's a legit Sotah, send her up to the temple. Now we send her up to the temple, and then they go through the whole proceeding at the temple, right? Where she gets the speech, where they make the water, where they make the offering, and all the rest of it. Okay. Now we had before also this whole system of sending along chaperones to make sure that they don't engage intimately along the way. Because if he engages intimately with her along the way, he is expressing that he's okay with what she did. Now, if you're okay with what she did, we're not going to make you go through with this whole Sotah business and erase God's name and do all that. You're okay with living with her. Go bad. So go deal with the consequences, or go get a therapist and fix your mistrust or whatever you guys got to do. But clearly you guys want to be together. If that's the case, again, she doesn't have to drink the Sotah water, and she retains the right to the ketubah because he's okay with being with her. So why would she lose her right to the ketubah? The only reason why she would lose her right to the ketubah, as we explained earlier and in yesterday's class, is if she is suspect of misbehavior. Right? So we're not going to put a financial burden on him to stay married to her because she misbehaved. But in this case, he misbehaved. Right? He broke the rule. He wasn't supposed to be intimate with her. He was supposed to let her go with the Sotah proceeding, but yet he was, demonstrating he's happy to be with her. Good, you're happy to be with her, then pay the ketubah if it comes to divorce. So these are the two cases in which the Gemara concludes, tell us ksubah, she takes her ketubah, she retains the right to her ketubah, the loy shoisais, and she does not drink the Sotah water. Chavdal Damadalef 24a, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines on top of the page, the first word. Continues the Mishnah. Mesu ba'aleim. what happens if the husband dies actually shasu before they had a chance to give her to drink the Sotah waters? So this is an interesting case. It's a legit relationship. So all else being equal, they're at the temple or they're on the way to the temple, and she's going to drink the water. She's okay with going through the whole process because she wants to prove her innocence. She's willing to take that risk. But now her husband died. So what's the story here? What do they do? Does she drink the water? Does she take Ketubah? Right, collecting Ketubah is in the case of divorce or death. Her husband's dead. Does she take Ketubah or not? So says the Gemara like this. Says the Mishnah. The house of Shammai is of the view, Noitlois Ketubah. She takes her Ketubah. Because as far as she's concerned, she was adamant in her innocence to the point that she was willing to risk drinking the water. So there's no reason she shouldn't take her Ketubah. The loy shoises, but she doesn't drink the Sotah water. And the reason she doesn't drink the Sotah water, Rashi tells us, is because the verse says, "Behavi ha'ish es ishtoi," that the man, the husband, shall bring his wife to the temple, and there she should drink the water. And the husband is no longer present to do that. So the Torah, when describing her drinking the water, it describes it as he brings her and wants her to drink the water because he wants to verify her innocence or her guilt. And because he's no longer here, we don't satisfy the qualification of the verse that he bring her to drink the water, and thus she can't drink the water. But because she's not drinking the water, there's no reason to take away her ketubah from her. And thus she keeps her ketubah. This is the opinion of Beis Shammai. But Beis Hillel says, we can't have it both ways. You can't tell her that she gets away without drinking the water and then she keeps her ketubah. It's not fair. It's not fair to him. He didn't choose to die along the way. It wasn't his choice. He died. Right? He wanted to go through with it. He was hoping to go through with it. And he would get some clarity. So it's not fair to him to make him pay out the ketubah when it's in a state of uncertainty, or his inheritors, considering that he's dead. And therefore, Beis Hillel frames it like this: or someone drinks, either they drink the Sotah water, or they don't take their ketubah. You can't have it both ways. And because we cannot make her drink the Sotah water because the husband is no longer present, she also can't take her ketubah. In other words, Beis Hillel is phrasing it in such a way to tell us that the reason why we're not giving her the ketubah is not because we're penalizing her, but because we're stuck. Because you can't extract the money out of the husband. It's not his fault. Right? So if he went through with the drinking, okay, so he got his process, he gets his verification that she's innocent, give her the ketubah. Right? But in this case, where we can't go through with getting the verification, we can't make him or his inheritors suffer and make them pay out. So it's not because we're trying to penalize her, but because we can't extract the cash out of him because we don't have the verification anymore. Right? So Beis Shammai says she can't drink because he's not present, but let her keep her ketubah. What did she do wrong? Beis Hillel says, I get what you're saying, but either drink or take ketubah. You can't take both. And because she can't drink, we're sorry, we can't give you the ketubah. This is Beis Hillel, the view of the views of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel respectively.
But the scenario
Sorry?
Is,
yeah.
The scenario is that she was actually guilty.
Well, we don't know that yet.
No.
Yeah.
If the scenario was that she was actually guilty.
Yeah.
And her husband was taking her to drink the Sotah water.
Yeah.
And if she would have drank the water, she would have died because she was guilty.
That's right.
But he died on the way.
That's right.
So those two scenarios don't fit if she was actually guilty.
Which is why Beis Hillel says we're not going to make him pay the ketubah, because maybe she's actually guilty. And we have no way of verifying that. And why are we making him suffer because of that? Why are we making him lose money? Because we can't verify it anymore.
Well, he can't lose any more money. He's not alive.
His inheritors, his estate loses the money.
Technically, she's an inheritor.
Not necessarily.
She's his wife.
No, not by Jewish law. By Jewish law, children inherit money, and then they are responsible.
We don't know if there's children involved here.
Either way, it would go to his brothers, let's say. It would go to someone on his side of the family, and then they would be responsible to give her a stipend based on the ketubah, right? So we can't, because of what you're saying, maybe she's actually guilty, right? And she just lucked out by her husband not being there available to make her drink the water. We can't make the estate lose that money. It's not fair to the estate, whoever the inheritors of the estate are, which
If
isn't
she's
her.
actually guilty, then she's not entitled to.
Okay, exactly.
Right.
Which is why we can't extract that money out of him or his estate, right? Okay, so let's do one more scenario. So just to understand the next scenario, the following. After a woman is divorced, after a couple is divorced, so if she is pregnant or if she just gave birth, our sages enacted that she should not remarry until the child is 2 years old. Our sages determined that a baby needs 2 years of weaning, the mother's attention, nursing and whatnot. So if she's married to the father, right? So obviously the father is there to support, or should be at least, ideally to support his wife as she is raising his child. But our sages determined that it's unfair to the child to allow the mother to remarry before the baby is 2 years old. So it's postponed. So if she's pregnant, she'd have to wait for birth, 2 years, and then she can remarry. The child's born already, wait till the child's 2 years old, and then remarry. Now, what happens if she went ahead and remarried against the sage's wishes? So she's pregnant. Yeah. Let's just, her husband died, or her husband divorced her. Either way, she's left a single pregnant girl, and against the sage's wishes, she married another guy. Or she has a baby who's not yet 2 years old. Her husband died, or her husband divorced her, and she went ahead and got married against the sage's wishes. Now, in this, whatever the reasons are, she decides to remarry. Now, this couple who have a legal marriage with a baby from another husband, from a previous husband, this couple have their own issues, and he warns her against secluding herself with someone. And she goes ahead and secludes herself, and now she's a Sotah. So what's the law here? So earlier, we saw that if there's a relationship that Torah says shouldn't happen, say a priest to a divorcee, or a high priest to a widow, or an illegitimate child, a person born of an illegitimate relationship to someone who is born of a legitimate relationship, all kinds of marriages that Torah says shouldn't happen. So the marriage went through anyway, but Torah says you really shouldn't be together. And because Torah says you really shouldn't be together, you lose the privileges of Sotah. Now, in this case, it's a bit different. The reason it's a bit different is because even though right now, this husband and wife shouldn't be together because she still has a child from a previous husband who is 2 years old, so they shouldn't be together, but give it some time and they will be able to be together. So even though right now, Torah doesn't condone the relationship, the Torah doesn't say that inherently they shouldn't marry each other. Torah just says, wait a bit. So the fact that Torah says, wait a bit, is that enough to make them lose the privileges of going through the Sotah process? So in the case of a divorcee to a Kohen, for the entire duration of their marriage, Torah is kind of yelling at them and saying, divorce, right? In the case of a woman who has a child under 2, who marries, or she's pregnant and marries someone else, right? In that case, even though Torah says they shouldn't be married, Torah's not saying never marry. If they stay married after 2 years, Torah says, okay, you shouldn't have done that, but you're here now. You're married legit. Fine, it's all good. So considering that Torah will be okay with the marriage, but right now it's not okay with it, is she allowed to go? Can she go through the Sotah process or not? Following the issue here? So it says the Gemara, 2 opinions. Muberes, a woman who is pregnant from a previous husband. Her husband's dead or divorced her. Chavere, from a friend, from another person. Umenikes chavere, she is nursing a child from a friend of her husband, meaning from another person, from a previous marriage. The child's not 2 yet. And now, in this new marriage, she becomes a Sotah because he warns her against secluding with another man and she secludes herself. So opinion number 1 says, Loi Shoisais, she cannot drink the Sotah waters because Torah doesn't like the relationship now. Torah says you shouldn't be together now, even though in 2 years from now, Torah is okay with you being married. But right now, Torah is not okay with you being married. No go through Sotah process. Because Sotah is reserved for those who Torah says are supposed to be together. And the Lord that's Ketubah, and she doesn't take her Ketubah. She doesn't take her Ketubah because, again, she's suspect. And there's no reason to financially hold him to a marriage in which he's suspect of her misbehavior. Rabbi Meir, this is the view of Rabbi Meir. But our sages say this isn't fair, even though currently Torah says they shouldn't be married. But Yachalu in theory, if he wanted to, he can divorce her right now. And then wait 2 years when the baby is 2 years old, and then remarry her. And therefore, because they could, if they want to, get married in a year and a half from now or 2 years from now, therefore, this relationship is by Torah law considered full-on legit, and therefore the Sotah law applies to them. And they can go through the Sotah process. Even though Torah says you should have waited, but because Torah doesn't outright forbid the relationship, it still constitutes a proper husband and wife in which the Sotah privileges are applied. So this is the dispute. Okay, we'll stop over here. And God willing, on Monday, this afternoon, God willing, I'm going to New York for my brother's wedding, Baruch Hashem, thank God. Shabbos. So God willing, on Monday, we're going to pick up and continue more such scenarios in which there's relationships that have these complexities, and whether or not they can go through the Sotah proceeding, and whether or not she retains her right to the Ketubah. Okay. Have a wonderful day, everybody, and a wonderful Shabbos.
God bless you, Rabbi. God bless you all.
Man, God bless you.
God bless.